Mom told everyone I was lucky, not smart. So I opened the letter from the 3% acceptance PhD program and watched her fake smile collapse. When you grow up in a household where love is distributed like rationed soup, one ladle per day with no refills, you quickly learn not to ask for seconds. My mother was not harsh, at least not in the ways that are commonly defined in headlines and family courtrooms. She fed me, dressed me, kept me in school, and replaced my laptop when it failed 2 weeks before senior finals. But her version of love was tinged with skepticism, as if everything nice I achieved was chance or fleeting. I used to assume she didn't believe in celebrating too soon. But by the time I was 16, I'd realized something worse. She simply didn't believe in me. She did not state it outright. That was not her style. Instead, it showed up in the 1,000 little fractures between her words. Like how she'd squint at my report cards, run her finger over the A- as if it were an error, and say, "I mean, this is good, but don't let it get to your head." Or how after I got into my first choice university, Mother responded, "Well, we'll see if you can keep up once you're there." You know, not everyone can handle that sort of pressure. When I secured a summer research position with one of my professors, her initial reaction wasn't, "Congratulations." It was, "Do they pay you?" Or, "Is this one of those free gigs that suck up your time?" Perhaps the worst part was her uncertainty. It was how Mom kept me in the shadow of a man who hadn't lived in our home in over a decade. My father, the phantom dropout, who abandoned me when I was 12 and stopped calling when I became 13. My mother avoided saying his name as much as possible, but she used his failure as a warning label. Every time I made a mistake, no matter how minor, she would say, "You're more like him than you realize." As if my DNA were a ticking time bomb, she had attempted and failed to disperse it. But here's something you don't hear about growing up with low expectations. It can either destroy you or transform you into something sharp. For me, it accomplished both. I became obsessed and relentless. I studied like the world would end if I received anything less than a 90. I filled journals with checklists and timelines, planned each semester 3 months in advance, and double-checked deadlines as if someone was assessing my life on punctuality. But I didn't tell her about much of it. Not when I was accepted into the honors program, or when my instructors nominated me for departmental awards. And certainly not when I was admitted to 3 PhD programs before graduating. I saved everything in a folder on my desk, each letter written on heavy paper with embossed heads and congratulatory signatures that virtually sparkled with approval, because I knew what would happen if I told her. She'd find a way to make it into a warning, or worse, a joke. And so, as the final semester ended, and I came across that stage with my cap falling sideways, and my tummy full of butterflies and pure defiant joy, part of me hoped, really hoped, that she'd say something different. That perhaps, just maybe, this something would shift in her, and she'd see me standing tall in that robe and know I wasn't a ticking bomb or a damaged mirror of my father. I was her daughter, and had made it. After the ceremony, she drew me into a tight hug in the parking lot and said, "Well, you didn't fall on your face, which is something." I laughed, but it did not reach my chest. A few days later, she knocked on my bedroom door as I was preparing books for storage. She had that face she used when she had an idea she knew I would agree with. Brows slightly lifted, voice falsely casual. "I was thinking," she explained, folding her arms. "We should throw you a small graduation party. Backyard. Nothing fancy. Only family and neighbors. You've earned it." I glanced at her, unsure what to say. Not that I was surprised. She enjoyed playing hostess because it made her look good, but part of me was afraid of what else she would do, or say. I paused, and it was louder than any response I could have offered. There were paper lanterns strung between the trees, one of which sagged slightly since the hook on the garage gutter rusted through last summer, and no one bothered to repair it. Plastic tables with dollar store linens bordered the yard's boundaries. Bowls of potato salad sweated in the heat, while a Bluetooth speaker on the deck played a shuffled playlist of music that tried too hard to seem festive. It wasn't fancy, but it required more effort than I anticipated. I told myself that meant something. That maybe this time the good intention would make it through her mouth without turning into a backhanded smack disguised as humor. It was my graduation celebration. The kind you only get once, unless you're the type who collects diplomas like Girl Scout awards. And I wanted to think, even for one afternoon, that I could unwind. That perhaps we could both let go of who we were, and simply enjoy it. I spent the morning hunting for a dress that felt like me, but didn't look like I was trying to impress anyone. I even did my makeup. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to commemorate the occasion by presenting a version of myself that felt worthy of being seen. Not graded, not evaluated. Simply observed. There were at least 55 people in the backyard, making it feel much larger than our small house, which can only accommodate about 15 people. Relatives, neighbors, a few classmates, and even a couple of professors appeared out of nowhere, like ghosts from the academic system I was finally breaking free from. I smiled, shook hands, accepted congratulations, and even laughed a few times, like any other person enjoying a milestone. For approximately an hour and a half, I almost convinced myself that everything would be okay. Then she raised her glass. It was nearing the end of the afternoon when the light had softened sufficiently to cast long shadows across the lawn, and people began to drift toward the dessert table for another slice of sheet cake. My mother rose up from her chair, clinking a spoon against her champagne glass in the manner that people do when they want to get someone's attention, but don't want to come across as desperate. Everyone turned. Everybody smiled. Even I grinned hesitantly, my gut tightening like a thread that had just been yanked too tightly. She cleared her throat and held her glass like a microphone and a sword. "Well," she said with a calm voice and bright eyes, "I'd like to thank everyone who came to celebrate my daughter." She pushed hard, and despite our reservations, she made it, pausing for laughing that hadn't yet begun. I felt the air shift, and then it arrived. "We all thought you'd drop out like your dad," she remarked, her smile just wide enough to be photographed. "But look at you. You're proving us incorrect." The laughter was sporadic at first. Nervous. Then somebody snorted. Then someone else chuckled. Within seconds the music spread across the yard like a slow-moving wave. I stood there transfixed and smiling, but only because I couldn't feel my face. I could not feel anything. My hands were cold. My jaw was locked. My pulse felt like it had moved to the wrong side of my throat. She was still smiling and holding her glass, as if she had just made a hilarious, innocent little toast, and couldn't understand why I hadn't joined in. And perhaps she didn't comprehend. Maybe the worst part was that she honestly thought her comment was a light-hearted little roast between loved ones. No knife, no wound, simply a jest, her way of commemorating the occasion. I looked around and noticed that no one was coming to my defense. No one was saying, "Hey, that's not funny." Or, "That was uncalled for," because it was most likely humorous to them. A snide remark from a mother who had been stern but clearly proud. Right? That is how they read it. That's how they decided to hear it. But I did not. I overheard the words she did not speak. I heard the years behind them, the whispered comparisons, the misgivings, and the continual reminders to not get ahead of yourself. I heard the voice of a lady who never imagined I'd be more than my father's daughter, who saw all of my accomplishments as a fleeting state, rather than a truth. For a minute, I saw myself through her eyes. Lucky, but not capable. A fluke, not a force. Then I reached into my handbag. My hands were still shaking, but I'd had that envelope for weeks, waiting for the proper moment to open it. I didn't expect it to be this moment, but when your mother slaps you with a smile in front of 55 people, your instincts kick in. I pulled it out. The return address is on thick ivory paper and is from a university that only accepts 3% of doctoral applicants. I raised it just high enough for everyone to notice before gently and methodically tearing it open down the side. The audience quieted. My mother's smile faded, and I stared her dead in the eyes as I unfurled the letter. When the air switches from casual to confrontational, laughing not only stops, but dies in the throat. Everyone recognizes right away that they were laughing at the wrong section of the story. That's what it felt like when I opened that letter in front of everyone in the backyard. As if I had ripped the rug out from under their cheap second-hand humor, and challenged them all to hit on something genuine for once. The ivory paper trembled slightly in my hands. Not because I was scared of what it said. I knew exactly what it meant, but I was still determining how much of myself I was willing to reveal to them. But then I looked at my mother, her champagne glass still high, as if she hadn't noticed the punchline had turned against her. I made the decision without realizing it. I wasn't intending on reading this today. I said, voice louder than I expected, the type of loudness that fills space without asking for permission. but since we're making pronouncements about who I am and what I'm capable of, I suppose now is as good a moment as any. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs, eyes darting from me to my mother like they were watching a slow-motion car crash, and couldn't tell which way the debris was going to fly. I cleared my throat and began reading aloud, each word like a scalpel cutting through the day's shallow ceremony. Dear Hilary Langston, we are pleased to offer you full admission to the Department of Comparative Literature's PhD program beginning this fall. In recognition of your outstanding academic record, research portfolio, and personal statement, we are also delighted to extend a full-ride fellowship package, which includes tuition coverage, a $32,000 annual living stipend, and guaranteed teaching assistant opportunities beginning in your second year. We believe you will be a valuable and remarkable addition to our academic community. I hesitated after the final sentence, allowing it to sink in and sting. My mother's smile had vanished, her lips pulled into a line so tight that they appeared to be attempting to disappear from her face completely. I noticed her gaze shift to the throng. She saw the gears turning as she tried to save the image she'd created for this occasion. Proud mother of a daughter who outperformed the odds despite not being born with potential. She seemed to want to say something. Maybe even applaud or try to laugh. But I didn't give her that chance. Funny, I said, folding the letter back into its envelope with meticulous, patient movements, since I don't recall them asking if I was more like my father. I turned and walked away. I did not say farewell. I didn't wait for reactions. I didn't even take a plate of cake on my way out, which was a real shame because I adore lemon sheet cake, and someone had undoubtedly brought a fantastic one. I just kept walking through the gate, down the driveway, and into the street, as if my feet had been waiting for this exit cue all along. By the end of the block, my phone had buzzed in my hand. That was her. The screen displayed her name, a mom in all caps, because I had never changed it since she gave me the phone in high school and urged me to only use it for emergencies and assignments. However, neither of those things were called for, and I knew it without even responding. I gazed at the ringing phone, my finger hesitating over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond and hear what excuse she had come up with. Her well-constructed half-apology would drift past me like an emotional olive branch. Perhaps she would say it was a joke. Perhaps she would say I misunderstood. Perhaps she would cry. But I did not tap the screen. I just let it ring because I knew it wasn't going to be the kind of call where someone says, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Instead, it was going to be the kind where someone says, "You didn't have to embarrass me like that." Or, "I was just trying to be funny." Or, "I can't believe you made such a scene at your own party." People, including my mother, never apologized for the wound. They simply blame you for bleeding. The phone soon stopped vibrating, and I placed it back into my purse without hesitation. My heart was still beating, but it was due to clarity rather than panic. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel obligated to explain who I was or how I had gotten here. I didn't feel the need to return to that yard and smooth the edges of her misery, just so I could be comfortable in my own skin. The world did not end when I went away. In fact, it seemed like the beginning. Her first call came just after dark. And it wasn't the sound of a mother swallowing her pride. It was the voice of a lady attempting to reattach her mask before anyone noticed it had slipped. Her tone was tight, but casual, a touch too light, as if she'd practiced how she believed an understanding mother should sound like. And now she was attempting it for the first time over the phone. "Hilary," she continued, pausing just long enough to sound annoyed but not regretful. "I'm not sure why you got so furious. That was a joke. Do you know how people do those funny little roasts at graduation parties? I was just trying to make light of the situation. Everybody was laughing. Nobody thought I meant it, but she did. And we both knew it since jokes don't land as hard unless they've been honed beforehand. They don't stick unless they're immersed in something that's been seething beneath the surface for a long time. And hers had been simmering since I was 12, when my father walked out and Mom looked me in the eyes and said, "He left us because he couldn't handle responsibility. You'd better hope you're stronger than that." I spent years interpreting that remark as a prophecy, or worse, a warning. I based my entire personality on proving her wrong. But it only needed one statement at a party to remind me how little she felt I could succeed. So, when she said I was just trying to make light of it, all I could do was sit there in my apartment, phone pressed to my cheek, staring at the wall as if it might give me the words I couldn't find, and finally say, "That wasn't your moment to make light of. It was mine." She didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice dropped into that bitter, wounded register she always slipped into when things didn't go her way. "You've been tough to communicate with for years," she responded. "It's like everything I say offends you. Your father always twisted everything I said too, and now you do it just like he did." That was the final straw. That sentence. The same ghost in each chamber was summoned again. My father. I'm not sure what drove me to do it, but after I hung up, I opened my laptop and looked for him. The last I heard, he had gone to Arizona with a new woman named Lydia, who worked with him in computer sales or something. We hadn't spoken for a decade. I wasn't sure if he wanted to hear from me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear from him either. But after hearing his narrative exclusively through my mother's voice for so long, I began to wonder what it sounded like on its own. It took me approximately 20 minutes to find an email address and have enough courage to write anything that did not seem like a therapeutic exercise or a demand. I replied I had graduated. I thought you should know. If you want to talk, I am willing to listen. I did not expect him to respond. He finished within 2 hours. 2 days later, I boarded a plane and flew across 2 states to sit across from a man I hadn't seen since I was just old enough to vote. He appeared older, but not in a bad way. Grayer around the temples, slightly slower to move, but still very much himself, which was both comforting and disconcerting. We met at a quiet little diner on the outskirts of town, where no one knew our names and didn't care what we were saying, and it felt like the safest place in the world to have the kind of talk that might shatter your entire childhood. He didn't waste time exchanging niceties. "I figured this would happen one day," he said, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. "But I didn't think it would take 10 years. I nodded, not sure how to explain that it had taken 10 years, because I wasn't ready to find out that everything I'd believed about him might be wrong, or worse, that it might be correct. "I just need to know," I replied, my voice tense and my heart racing in my ears. "Why did you leave?" He glanced down for a long while, as if he were digging through a memory drawer he hadn't opened in years, and when he finally began, his voice was low and steady, without reproach, but full of weight. "She offered me an ultimatum," he explained. "The last time we fought, she said I wasn't strong enough to be your father, because I didn't treat you like a soldier. If I didn't agree to raise you the way she wanted, she would make sure you thought I was the problem. And I told her I wasn't going to turn you into someone afraid of her own mother." I packed my bag the next day. The words landed with a dull thud in my chest. I'd always imagined him walking out casually, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, never looking back. But that wasn't the story he told. Even if it wasn't the whole truth, because every story has at least 3 sides, it cracked something open in me. For the first time, I didn't see him as a coward, but as a man who fled to avoid becoming something worse. "Why didn't you ever tell me that?" I asked barely above a whisper. "Because she told me if I tried," he said, "she'd make sure you never spoke to me again." And for a while, it worked. When I flew home the next day, I didn't call her. I didn't text her, and I didn't send her the graduation photos that my friends had taken, despite the fact that I looked genuinely happy in a few of them for the first time in months, because I had a different image in my head. A daughter standing between 2 broken people, finally asking which one handed her the hammer. Coming home from a trip that splits your reality in 2 is strange, like stepping back into a life that is still dressed in your clothes, but doesn't quite fit anymore. The furniture is the same. The kitchen smells faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee grounds, and the front door still squeaks slightly when it opens. But you're different. Or maybe not. Maybe you're just finally aware of how much of yourself you've been squeezing into someone else's version of who you were supposed to be. The morning after I returned from visiting my father, I stood in the driveway for a full 3 minutes before going inside, just staring at the chipped paint on the front porch, and wondering how many conversations had been swallowed by the silence in that house. When I finally stepped through the door, she was sitting in the living room, her legs crossed at the ankle, reading a magazine she probably wasn't really reading. She didn't look up right away, but I could feel her sensing my presence like an animal feels an earthquake. Tense, alert, pretending everything's still calm. When she finally met my gaze, her expression was carefully neutral, as if she was waiting to see which version of me had returned home. "Did you have a good trip?" she asked, As if we were two coworkers passing each other at the water cooler. Not a mother and daughter whose last conversation had ended in public humiliation and a 10-year secret detonating in my chest. I didn't respond. Instead, I put down my bag, walked to the edge of the living room rug, and stood there just far enough away that she'd have to tilt her head to meet my gaze. I didn't sit either. I didn't drop my keys. I didn't pretend this was anything other than what it was. An exorcism of every unspoken thing that had been rotting between us since the day my father left, and she decided to turn that into her power play. I talked to Dad, I said, letting the words hang like smoke. She blinked but didn't flinch. Oh, she said, as if I'd mentioned running into an old high school friend. How is he? He told me why he left, I said. He told me everything. She put down the magazine, then slowly, carefully folded it closed as if it mattered. I'm sure he did, she said, crossing her arms, and I'm sure he made himself sound like the hero. I took a deep breath, not to calm down, but to study the blade I was about to lay across the table. He said you gave him a choice, and that staying would have meant watching you transform me into a version of yourself. He couldn't stand, that you said he wasn't strong enough to raise me right, and that if he left, I'd think he was a coward. Her lips twitched slightly. And you believed him? She asked, her voice flat. I didn't want to, I said. But then I thought of the toast. I recalled every time you compared me to him as if it were an insult. I reflected on how you made me feel as if loving him meant betraying you, and how you utilized his quiet to create the tale that worked for you. Something flickered in her eyes then. Maybe regret, or the first crack in the armor she'd been wearing so long it probably felt like skin. But she didn't say anything, and I didn't stop. You told me he was weak, and maybe he was, but you made strength look like punishment, and love feel like a challenge I had to pass. And you act like I've been angry for no reason, like I've spent years trying to push you away. But you never looked at how hard I had to fight just to keep myself together around you. She stood slowly, arms still folded, but her voice softer now. I did the best I could, she said. I know, and I don't hate you for it, but your best left a mark. There was a long pause, then, a silence so thick, I could feel it pressing against my ribs. I picked up my keys from the counter, the ones I'd been carrying since high school. I looked like I didn't care, but I did. I'm not trying to punish you, I added. I just needed to say it out loud. Not for revenge, not for drama, but for me. She nodded stiffly, uncertainly. Still wearing the same fading purple lanyard with the little cracked charm at the end, I walked to the front door, opened it halfway, and then stopped. She didn't ask me to stay or tell me to leave. She just stood there. And I stood there. For a moment I wondered if this was the end, or if it was just the beginning of something quieter, slower, less about blame and more about what remains when all the illusions are gone. I stared down at the key in my palm. She built a house with guilt in its walls, then asked why I never felt at home. Thanks for watching and sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next drama-filled episode.